You slept 8 hours last night. You woke up on schedule. You went through the motions of your morning. And yet, somehow, you feel like you're dragging something invisible through every moment of your day. This isn't the kind of tired that a good night's rest can solve. This is the exhaustion that lives in a place beyond your body, settling somewhere in the architecture of your soul itself. Perhaps you've noticed it creeping in gradually, a dullness that wasn't there before. Life continues around you. Events unfold. People talk. The world spins. But you're experiencing it all from behind some kind of invisible barrier, like watching everything happen through frosted glass. The strange part is that nothing catastrophic occurred. No single trauma you can point to. No obvious breaking point. Just day after day of showing up, managing, adapting, until one morning you realize the light inside you has dimmed to something you barely recognize. This exhaustion doesn't arrive with fanfare or crisis. Instead, it accumulates in the margins of your life. In every moment you said yes when your entire being wanted to say no. In every conversation where you swallowed your authentic response and offered what was expected instead. In every instance you met someone else's standards while quietly betraying your own. These moments seem small in isolation, almost insignificant, but they compound like interest on a debt you didn't know you were taking on. When people ask what's bothering you, your mind goes blank. How do you articulate something that has no clear origin story? How do you explain that you're exhausted not from one overwhelming event, but from thousands of small adaptations that slowly hollowed you out? The weight you're carrying doesn't have a name that satisfies anyone, including yourself. So you shrug, say you're fine, and the distance between your inner reality and what you present to the world stretches a little wider. What makes this state particularly confusing is that you're still functional. You're meeting your obligations. From any external measure, you appear to be managing, but functionality and vitality are not the same thing. You can execute tasks while feeling fundamentally disconnected from them. You can participate in life without truly inhabiting it. And this is where the real story begins. Not in collapse or failure, but in the slow realization that you've been operating on emergency reserves far longer than anyone, including yourself, understood. This particular brand of fatigue shows up as a persistent flatness, an emotional muting where joy becomes theoretical rather than experiential. You remember what it felt like to be excited about things, to look forward to moments, to feel genuine enthusiasm rise naturally within you. But now those experiences seem distant, like memories from someone else's life. Motivation doesn't flow anymore. It has to be manufactured through willpower and discipline, which only adds another layer of exhaustion to the pile. Your body might be still when you rest, but something deeper never powers down. Your nervous system remains vigilant, always scanning for the next demand, the next expectation, the next thing you'll need to handle. True rest becomes impossible because you've forgotten how to signal to yourself that it's safe to lower your guard. So you cycle through your days and nights in a state of constant low-grade activation, wondering why nothing seems to recharge you anymore. If this describes your experience, understand this from the beginning. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not failing at being human. What you're experiencing is your system's response to carrying more than it was designed to carry, for longer than anyone should have to carry it. This exhaustion is not the problem itself. It's the alarm system trying desperately to get your attention. And it deserves to be understood rather than silenced. Scientists and psychologists have language for what you're experiencing. They call it emotional exhaustion or burnout or nervous system dysregulation. But clinical terminology often misses the deeply human nature of what's actually happening inside you. This isn't about pathology or diagnosis. This is about a fundamental equation that has fallen out of balance. Your emotional output has exceeded your emotional input for so long that your internal reserves have been depleted. Think of it like running a bank account where withdrawals consistently outpace deposits. For weeks, months, perhaps years, you've been giving your attention, your patience, your empathy, your energy to others and to obligations. You've been regulating your emotions, maintaining composure, adapting to circumstances, performing emotional labor that no one acknowledges or compensates. Initially, you managed this deficit. You told yourself it was temporary, that things would ease up soon. But soon kept getting postponed, and the withdrawals kept coming. Eventually, something shifts. Your mind, recognizing that the current operating system is unsustainable, begins implementing conservation measures. This is where motivation starts evaporating, where emotional responses become muted or disappear entirely, where even activities that previously brought satisfaction now feel neutral or burdensome. From the outside, this can look like depression or laziness or a character defect. From the inside, it's your psyche trying to prevent complete system failure. Here's what's crucial to understand. This response is intelligent, not dysfunctional. When resources become scarce, any well-designed system prioritizes essential functions and reduces non-essential ones. Your brain doesn't stop caring because something is wrong with you. It stops investing emotional energy in things because emotional energy has become dangerously scarce and your survival system has taken over decision-making. The biological mechanisms underlying this experience are both fascinating and sobering. Chronic stress fundamentally alters how your brain operates. Your dopamine system, which governs motivation, reward, and the sense that effort is worthwhile, begins functioning differently. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure or happiness. It's the neurochemical that makes you want things, that creates the pull toward goals and experiences. When dopamine signaling decreases, the world loses its magnetic quality. Things that should feel rewarding land flat. Tasks that should feel manageable feel overwhelming. Simultaneously, your stress hormone systems remain chronically activated. Cortisol and adrenaline, which are designed for short-term crisis response, become your baseline operating state. Your body treats normal life as an ongoing emergency. This keeps your muscles subtly tensed, your mind vigilantly scanning for threats, your breathing shallow, your sleep fragmented. You're stuck in a state of hypervigilance that masquerades as normal because you've been in it so long you've forgotten what actual calm feels like. This also explains why standard rest doesn't fix what you're experiencing. You can take a vacation, sleep in, spend a weekend doing nothing, and return feeling just as depleted. The issue isn't simply a lack of downtime. It's that your nervous system hasn't received the signal that danger has passed, that it's genuinely safe to stand down. Without that fundamental shift from survival mode to safety mode, no amount of external rest translates into internal restoration. Your brain becomes cautious about hope and desire because hoping requires vulnerability and energy. Disappointment hurts, and when you're already depleted, your system calculates that expecting nothing is safer than expecting something and having those expectations unmet. This isn't pessimism or negativity, it's a protective strategy. The less you reach for, the less you can be hurt by not receiving. The less you anticipate, the less energy you waste on outcomes you can't control. This is also why quick dopamine hits, endless scrolling, binge watching, constant stimulation provide temporary relief but no lasting restoration. These activities keep your nervous system activated, giving you just enough engagement to distract from the deeper exhaustion without actually addressing it. They are the psychological equivalent of eating sugar when your body needs protein. The craving gets temporarily satisfied, but the underlying depletion persists and often worsens. Understanding the biology doesn't make the experience easier, but it does shift something important. Your exhaustion isn't evidence of personal failure. It's evidence of a system responding exactly as it should to circumstances it was never designed to endure indefinitely. You don't need to try harder or push through more effectively. You need the opposite. You need conditions that allow your nervous system to recognize that survival mode is no longer necessary. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Here's an uncomfortable truth that rarely gets acknowledged. The people experiencing the deepest exhaustion are often not the ones who gave up easily. They're the ones who held on the longest. They're the individuals who learned early in life that being strong was how they stayed safe, how they earned love, how they maintained belonging. And that strength, practiced without relief or reciprocity, eventually becomes its own form of suffering. Many exhausted people share a similar origin story, though the details differ. Perhaps you were the child who noticed tension in the room before others did, and instinctively tried to ease it. Maybe you learned that being easy, being helpful, being low maintenance made life smoother for everyone. Or perhaps you discovered that emotional needs were met with discomfort or dismissal, so you learned to handle everything internally. These weren't conscious decisions. They were adaptations to environments that required them. Over time, these adaptations crystallized into identity. Being capable became your defining feature. Being reliable became how others saw you and how you saw yourself. You became the person people turned to in crisis, the one who could handle things, the one who stayed calm when others fell apart. And there's genuine value in these qualities. The problem isn't the strength itself. The problem is when strength becomes the only role you're allowed to occupy. When you're perpetually the steady one, there's nowhere to place your own instability. When you're always the person offering support, there's no clear space to need support yourself. When you've built an entire identity around managing difficulty with grace, falling apart feels like a betrayal of who you're supposed to be. So you keep managing, keep coping, keep maintaining composure, while something inside you slowly collapses under the weight of never being allowed to not be okay. This pattern gets reinforced by external validation. People praise your strength, your reliability, your emotional intelligence. They tell you they don't know what they'd do without you. These affirmations feel good temporarily, but they also lock you deeper into the role. Because now other people's stability depends on your perpetual stability. Your worth becomes entangled with your usefulness, and useful people don't get to stop functioning just because they're tired. What makes this especially painful is the loneliness embedded in it. When you're always the strong one, people stop checking if you need anything. They assume you're fine because you always seem fine. They don't realize that what looks like effortless competence is actually exhausting performance, that what appears to be natural resilience is actually learned suppression. That behind your composed exterior is someone who's been holding their breath for years. The emotional labor involved in this performance is staggering and largely invisible. You're not just managing your own emotions, you're managing how your emotions affect others. You're not just solving your own problems, you're solving them in ways that don't burden anyone else. You're regulating yourself constantly, adjusting your needs to accommodate others, making yourself smaller so others can be bigger. And all of this regulation requires enormous energy that no one acknowledges because the whole point is to make it look easy. This is how strength without reciprocity becomes isolation. You're surrounded by people, yet fundamentally alone with your actual experience. Because the version of you that people know and depend on isn't your full self. It's your functional self, your capable self, the self that has learned to perform stability. Your vulnerable, uncertain, exhausted self rarely gets airtime because letting that part show feels dangerous or indulgent or like you're letting everyone down. When people in this pattern finally say they're tired of existing, it's not because they lack resilience, it's because they've been resilient for too long without adequate support. Their exhaustion isn't character failure. It's the natural consequence of endurance without rest, of giving without receiving, of holding others while no one holds them. And the work required at this stage isn't building more strength. It's allowing themselves to soften, to need, to be held, to discover that their worth exists independent of their utility. That's not weakness entering the picture. That's wholeness trying to emerge. Your exhaustion doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within a larger cultural context that has very specific beliefs about worth, productivity, and what it means to live a valuable life. We inhabit a system that has quietly taught us to equate movement with meaning, busyness with importance, and constant output with human value. And within that system, your exhaustion makes perfect sense. From early childhood, most of us absorbed messages about productivity that now operate like background programming. We learned that rest is something you earn through sufficient work, that stopping before you're completely depleted is lazy, that if you're not constantly improving, optimizing, advancing, you're falling behind. These messages came from parents, teachers, media, workplace cultures, and broader social narratives about success. They were rarely stated explicitly, but they shaped our internal landscape nonetheless. The result is that many people now experience what researchers call rest guilt. Even when your body screams for pause, your mind counters with accusations. You should be doing more. Other people have it worse. You haven't accomplished enough to deserve rest. If you stop now, everything will fall apart. Rest stops feeling like a biological necessity and starts feeling like a moral failure. The consequence is that you override your exhaustion signals repeatedly until you can barely hear them anymore. This dynamic is particularly insidious because guilt doesn't restore energy, it drains it further. You're not just tired, you're tired and ashamed of being tired. You're depleted and simultaneously judging yourself for your depletion. This creates a vicious cycle where the very thing you need, rest, stillness, non-productivity, becomes psychologically inaccessible because accessing it triggers too much internal conflict. Meanwhile, the culture that creates this exhaustion profits from it. Economic systems that depend on constant productivity, consumption, and output need people who never fully rest. Social media platforms that monetize attention need users who compulsively check their devices. Companies that extract maximum labor need employees who believe their value is tied to their productivity. Your inability to rest serves multiple systems that have no incentive to support your actual well-being. What makes this particularly difficult to resist is that these systems frame burnout as personal failure rather than systemic design. When you're exhausted, the narrative suggests you need better time management, more self-discipline, improved productivity hacks. The problem is located in you rather than in expectations that are fundamentally unsustainable. This keeps people trapped in cycles of self-improvement that never address the root issue, that the game itself is rigged against human limitations. The pressure to constantly optimize extends even into rest itself. Relaxation becomes another project to manage. Meditation apps, sleep trackers, wellness routines that require research, planning, and execution. Rest gets colonized by productivity logic, turned into something else you can succeed or fail at. The simple act of doing nothing without purpose or improvement becomes nearly impossible. Consider how normalized overextension has become. People brag about how little sleep they get, how many hours they worked, how full their calendars are. Exhaustion becomes a status symbol, proof that you're important, needed, living a significant life. Meanwhile, prioritizing well-being gets coded as self-indulgent or privileged. Boundaries get framed as selfishness. Saying no gets interpreted as not being a team player. Within this context, your exhaustion isn't mysterious. It's the predictable outcome of trying to meet standards that were designed to be unachievable. You're not weak for feeling depleted. You're human. And the human nervous system was never designed to operate in a state of perpetual productivity, constant connectivity, and endless self-improvement. What you're experiencing isn't personal failure. It's a rational response to irrational expectations. The shift begins when you recognize that uncomfortable feeling you get when you rest, that nagging sense that you should be doing something. That's not your authentic instinct. That's conditioning. And conditioning can be questioned. Stepping outside a system that trained you to equate your value with your output won't feel natural at first. It will feel wrong, irresponsible, selfish. That discomfort is the sound of programming being challenged. And challenging it is how you begin to reclaim rest as a right rather than a reward you must earn through sufficient depletion. As emotional exhaustion deepens, many people notice a shift that's difficult to name but impossible to ignore. Things that used to bring pleasure simply don't anymore. Music sounds flat and distant. Conversations with friends feel effortful rather than energizing. Even moments specifically designed for enjoyment, a nice meal, a beautiful sunset, time with loved ones land with strange neutrality. Psychologists have a term for this: anhedonia, the diminished capacity to experience pleasure. But the clinical language doesn't capture how disorienting this loss actually feels. Anhedonia isn't the same as sadness, though people often confuse the two. Sadness is still feeling something, even if that something is painful. Anhedonia is closer to feeling nothing, or more accurately, feeling muted versions of everything. It's like someone turned down the volume on your emotional experience until everything operates at the same low frequency. Joy doesn't disappear completely, it just becomes distant and theoretical, something you understand conceptually but can't quite access directly. This state often triggers withdrawal, though not the dramatic kind that people easily recognize. You don't announce you're pulling away. You just quietly start canceling plans, letting messages go unanswered, declining invitations, choosing isolation not because you actively want to be alone, but because every social interaction requires emotional output your system no longer has available. Even casual small talk can feel like trying to lift something far heavier than it appears. The withdrawal gets misunderstood by almost everyone, including yourself. From the outside, it looks like avoidance or disinterest. People wonder if they did something wrong, if you're upset with them, if you're becoming antisocial. But internally, the mechanics are different. You're not pushing people away to be cold or distant. You're creating space because your nervous system, already operating in overdraft, needs to reduce stimulation to prevent complete collapse. Silence and solitude start feeling safer than engagement because engagement requires resources you don't have. This is where well-meaning advice often backfires spectacularly. People tell you to get out more, push yourself, stay connected, as if the problem is simply lack of willpower. But for someone in true anhedonia, these suggestions land like being told to run a marathon when you can barely walk. The issue isn't motivation or attitude, it's capacity. Your emotional bandwidth is genuinely depleted, and forcing connection before that capacity is restored just deepens the depletion. What many people don't realize is that withdrawal in this context is actually a form of self-preservation. When your system is overwhelmed, reducing demands becomes necessary for survival. It's not a personality flaw or social dysfunction. It's regulation. The nervous system, recognizing it's overextended, implements conservation measures. And one of the most effective ways to conserve energy is to reduce the number of interactions requiring emotional performance. The tragedy is that isolation, while protective in the short term, often perpetuates the problem. Humans are fundamentally social creatures. We need connection for well-being. But we need a particular kind of connection, the kind that doesn't require performance, that allows us to be fully ourselves without filtering or managing how we show up. When that kind of connection isn't available, being alone can feel safer than being with people who expect a version of you that you can no longer maintain. This creates a painful paradox. You're isolated because you're exhausted from performing connection, but the isolation prevents the kind of authentic connection that could actually help restore you. You're caught between two forms of depletion, the exhaustion of fake connection and the loneliness of no connection. Both hurt, just in different ways. What helps isn't pressure to reconnect or force socialization. What helps is creating conditions where connection becomes less costly. This means relationships where you don't have to pretend, where your exhaustion can be visible without judgment, where you're allowed to just exist without entertaining or managing anyone else's experience. It means finding or creating spaces where rest is respected, where silence is okay, where you can be depleted without explaining or apologizing for it. When withdrawal is understood not as a character flaw, but as a signal of a system that needs protection, shame begins to loosen. And when shame loosens, small movements toward reconnection become possible. Not through force or discipline, but through gentleness. Not by pushing yourself to engage before you're ready, but by finding the people and spaces where readiness isn't required, where your presence is enough, even if that presence is quiet, tired, and not performing anything for anyone. There's another dimension to exhaustion that goes deeper than emotional or physical depletion. It's the exhaustion that comes from living a life that doesn't align with who you actually are. Not because anything is dramatically wrong, but because the life you're living no longer reflects your values, your truth, or your inner compass. Psychologists sometimes call this existential fatigue or meaning fatigue, and it's often heavier than all the other forms combined. On the surface, everything might look stable. You have routines, responsibilities, structure. Maybe you have achievements that others would envy. But internally, something essential is missing. Days blur into weeks, blur into months with a sameness that feels suffocating. Wake up, execute obligations, scroll through distractions, sleep, repeat. Life starts feeling less like living and more like maintaining an elaborate structure that you can't remember why you built. When this happens, questions start emerging that frighten you. What's the point of all this? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Is this really all there is? These questions get dismissed as midlife crisis or ingratitude or privileged complaining, but they're none of those things. They're signals. When your mind asks what the point is, it's not giving up. It's searching for a reason to stay engaged with what you're doing. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, observed something crucial. Humans can endure almost anything if they have a sense of meaning, a why that makes the how tolerable. But here's what often gets misunderstood. Your why doesn't need to be grand or impressive or altruistic. It doesn't need to change the world or inspire others. It just needs to be true for you. It needs to be something that makes your daily actions feel connected to who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. Meaning fatigue settles in when there's a disconnect between your daily life and your deeper values. When you're operating from scripts written by others, expectations, cultural narratives, family patterns, rather than from your own authentic direction. You're living a version of life that made sense at some point, that you agreed to in some earlier iteration of yourself, but that no longer fits who you've become. And continuing to inhabit that misalignment is profoundly draining. The exhaustion that comes from misalignment is particularly insidious because it can coexist with external success. You can be achieving goals, checking boxes, receiving validation, and still feel fundamentally empty. Because achievement without alignment doesn't nourish. It might provide temporary satisfaction or relief, but it doesn't restore vitality. You're watering a plant that isn't yours, while the one that is yours withers from neglect. This is where the real work begins, not in pushing through the exhaustion, but in listening to what it's trying to tell you. Because exhaustion this deep is rarely just about being tired. It's about being tired of a particular way of being, a particular set of compromises, a particular distance from your authentic self. It's your system's way of saying, this path isn't working anymore. Something needs to change. Listening to this kind of exhaustion doesn't mean burning your life down or making rash decisions. It means paying attention to where you feel most depleted versus where you feel most alive. Notice what drains you, not because it's hard, but because it's misaligned. Notice what restores you, even in small doses. These signals are your internal guidance system trying to redirect you toward a life that actually fits. Alignment isn't about perfection, it's about truth. It's about making choices that reflect your actual values rather than inherited ones. It's about building a life where your daily actions flow from who you are rather than who you were trained to be. And here's what's remarkable. When you start moving toward alignment, even in small ways, energy starts returning. Not because life becomes easy, but because effort in alignment feels fundamentally different than effort in resistance. Your body follows your soul. When you're living in alignment, work can be challenging, but it doesn't deplete you in the same way. When you're living in misalignment, even simple tasks feel unbearable because you're not just doing the thing, you're also carrying the weight of knowing it doesn't truly matter to you. That double burden is what makes everything feel so heavy. If you've read this far, something in you already knows that a different way is possible. You know, because you're exhausted not from living too little, but from living in a way that doesn't honor your truth. And that knowing, even when it comes wrapped in fatigue and confusion, is actually the beginning of change. Because you can't unhear the signal once you've recognized what it's saying. If this resonated with you, you're not alone. Your exhaustion isn't personal failure, it's information. The work ahead isn't about becoming stronger, but about aligning with who you actually are beneath all the performances. This channel explores the quiet, psychological experiences people rarely discuss but deeply recognize. Subscribe for more content that truly sees you. Drop a comment sharing which part of this exhaustion feels most familiar right now. Your honesty might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Subscribe, comment, let's continue this conversation.